1942, Malta. The sky darkened as hundreds of bombers swarmed above, engines roaring like thunder across stone streets. Nobody expected Malta to survive the month. Down below, battered shelters rattled as civilians and RAF pilots braced for an onslaught unlike any other. A siege that would leave the world stunned. Malta, more bombed than London, was a speck in the Mediterranean, but its fate would decide the future of an entire war. The enemy believed their victory was inevitable. What happened next rewrote those calculations forever. April began with warnings scribbled in underground command posts. The storm is coming. By dusk, the island had already endured 30 air raids in a single day. Spitfire and Hurricane pilots scrambled repeatedly from Halfar and Tarkali airfields, engines groaning under stress, knowing every flight might be their last. An epic standoff was unfolding. A forbidden hope flickered among defenders, who clung to the idea they might resist the impossible. Bombs shattered the ancient ramparts of Valletta. General Kesselring's Luftwaffe unleashed a campaign driven by numbers and certainty. With enough aircraft, Malta would finally fall. Yet from catacombs below ruined basilicas to the tunnels beneath Floriana, radio operators hunched over receivers, intercepting German codes. The Axis powers wanted Malta erased not just as a symbol, but as a strategic threat, an unsinkable aircraft carrier that obstructed supply lines to North Africa. The British High Command responded with a desperate gamble. Operation Calendar and Bowery, secret convoys dispatching vital fuel and munitions across a hostile sea. "Hold Malta or lose the Mediterranean," Churchill declared, his words echoing across London, Gibraltar and Alexandria. On April 9th, 80 bombers swept over Grand Harbour, targeting fuel tanks and ships docked in the shadow of battered fortifications. Anti-aircraft batteries, nicknamed the island's guns, lined the coast. Amid smoke and confusion, civilians packed cathedrals and crypts, clinging to prayers as shockwaves rocketed through limestone walls. The defenders were outnumbered, outgunned, and nearly out of fuel. Yet squadron leader Stan Turner, a pilot whose stained uniform bore witness to endless combat, scanned a map peppered with red pins, marking fresh attacks. RAF Spitfires soared into flak-ridden skies, each sortie more desperate than the last. Fuel reserves plummeted so low that mechanics resorted to salvaging from damaged planes and abandoned trucks. A rejected idea, but a lifeline. Local children counted bomb craters outside their doorsteps. Housewives carried water past shattered glass, hoping every day wasn't the last. Despite hunger, exhaustion and fear, Malta's people refused to surrender. The ground shook as yet another formation of Heinkel and Junkers bombers arrived, their payloads meant to crush the last pockets of resistance. By mid-April, Malta's defenders had achieved the unthinkable. 100 bombers were shot down or crippled in the skies above in just 2 weeks, a feat no Allied force elsewhere had managed. Every victory was paid for in blood. Pilots limped home in riddled cockpits, gunners loaded and fired until their hands blistered and ears rang. Still, the relentless raids continued. The cost mounted, homes leveled, families torn apart, churches gutted. Yet the defenders, British, Maltese, and a handful of Free Poles, Australians, and Canadians, made every round count. On April 15th, a secret operation began under darkness. British submarines managed to offload crucial ammunition and medical supplies near Slima, defying Axis blockades. This impossible mission would allow Malta to keep firing back. By Easter week, the island's gunners claimed 73 bombers destroyed. A shocking truth revealed in censored telegrams to London. The impact was immediate. In Rome, Axis High Command drafted frantic reports, noting 300 bombers lost or damaged over Malta in a single month. Hitler demanded answers. How had a fortress so small inflicted losses so great? Pilots returning to Sicily described Malta as the fortress that never sleeps, haunted by searchlights and anti-aircraft fire. Churchill sent medals, telegrams, and praise, but behind the celebrations, the island counted its scars. The Maltese cross became a symbol not just of survival, but of defiance. Ordinary men and women emerged from rubble, battered but undefeated. Malta had rewritten the rules of aerial warfare. Where others saw a doomed target, the defenders saw hope. Hope strong enough to shoot down 300 bombers and alter the balance of power in the Mediterranean forever. The morning of April 16th brought no relief. As Malta's defenders counted their victories, Kesselring's staff in Sicily planned an even deadlier response. Intelligence reports flooded German headquarters. Malta's anti-aircraft defenses had claimed another 12 bombers overnight, bringing the month's total to a staggering 187 confirmed kills. The numbers defied logic. How could such a tiny island, barely 17 miles long, devastate entire squadrons of the Reich's finest aircraft? Inside the operations room beneath Valletta's scarred streets, Wing Commander Hugh Puheloid studied reconnaissance photographs with growing amazement. Each image revealed the same impossible truth: Malta was winning. Crashed Junkers 88s littered the countryside around Medina. Heinkel 105s lay twisted in farmers' fields, their crews either dead or captured. The island's Spitfire squadrons, reinforced by desperate convoy runs, had evolved into a lethal hunting force that German pilots now called the Malta Maulers. Yet victory came at a price that haunted every survivor. Entire neighborhoods in Valletta lay in ruins. The Royal Opera House, once Malta's cultural crown jewel, stood gutted and blackened. Families huddled in limestone caves that had sheltered their ancestors from Ottoman sieges centuries before. Food rations dropped to starvation levels. Medical supplies ran so low that doctors performed surgery by candlelight, using wine as antiseptic when morphine vanished. The psychological impact rippled across both sides of the conflict. RAF pilots, exhausted from flying 4 sorties daily, discovered a fierce pride in their impossible mission. Flight Lieutenant George Burling, a Canadian ace, described the sensation of diving through flak clouds to intercept bomber formations. Every kill felt like saving 1,000 lives. His Spitfire, nicknamed Screwball Express, would claim 27 enemy aircraft over Malta's skies, a personal record that became legendary among Commonwealth forces. Meanwhile, Luftwaffe morale cracked under mounting losses. Experienced bomber crews, veterans of the Battle of Britain and Eastern Front campaigns, refused missions over Malta. Some pilots developed what German medical officers termed Malta fever, a psychological breakdown triggered by the island's relentless defenses. Kesselring himself admitted in classified dispatches to Berlin that Malta had become a graveyard for the finest aircraft in Europe. The turning point arrived during the final week of April. Operation Bowery delivered 64 fresh Spitfires to Malta's battered airfields, flown directly from the aircraft carrier HMS Eagle. These reinforcements, combined with salvaged ammunition from sunken convoy ships, transformed Malta from a desperate fortress into an offensive weapon. The island's fighters began hunting German aircraft across Sicily itself, attacking enemy airfields and supply columns with devastating effect. Local Maltese civilians played crucial roles in this transformation. Dockyard workers labored around the clock to repair damaged aircraft, often under continued bombardment. Farmers provided intelligence on crash sites, helping rescue Allied pilots while capturing German air crews. Women and children served as spotters, their sharp eyes tracking enemy formations from church towers and rooftops across the archipelago. By April 30th, the impossible had become reality. Malta's defenders tallied 300 enemy aircraft destroyed or critically damaged, a monthly total that exceeded combined Allied victories across North Africa, Russia, and the Pacific theaters. The statistical impact was staggering. Kesselring's air fleets had lost nearly 40% of their operational strength. Bomber production in Germany couldn't match Malta's kill rate. The strategic consequences reached far beyond the Mediterranean. With Luftwaffe strength decimated, Rommel's Africa Corps faced severe supply shortages. Allied convoys reached Alexandria unmolested for the first time in months. Churchill declared Malta's defense the turning point of the entire war, while Roosevelt ordered immediate reinforcements to capitalize on this unexpected victory. As May dawned over Malta's scarred landscape, survivors emerged from their shelters to witness something unprecedented. Empty skies. The constant drone of enemy engines had ceased. Children played in streets cleared of rubble, while their parents rebuilt homes and businesses with quiet determination. The siege wasn't over, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. Malta had achieved the impossible, not through superior numbers or advanced technology, but through sheer, unbreakable will. Every bomb crater told a story of resilience. Every downed aircraft represented lives saved across multiple theaters of war. The tiny island had become a symbol that would inspire resistance movements from Norway to Greece, proving that determination could triumph over overwhelming odds. To understand why Malta's ordeal in 1942 became legendary, one must trace the island's fate through centuries of conquest and defiance. Lying halfway between Sicily and North Africa, Malta's rocky outcrop had long been a strategic jewel, fought over by Romans, Arabs, Crusaders, and now in the age of mechanized warfare, the mightiest empires of the 20th century. When World War II erupted, the British garrison transformed Malta into an impregnable fortress. Yet by 1942, it was barely holding on. The geography that made Malta invaluable also left it startlingly vulnerable. With a population of just 270,000, its resources were always at risk. Surrounded by Axis territory, Malta's position blocked the German and Italian resupply routes to Rommel's Africa Corps. For Hitler and Mussolini, control of the Mediterranean required capturing Malta first. It was, as Churchill called it, the unsinkable aircraft carrier. In late 1941 and early 1942, convoys braved minefields and torpedoes to ferry in food, ammunition, and replacement aircraft. But these journeys grew deadlier every month. The winter siege of 1941–42 had nearly starved the island into submission. Only a trickle of supplies sneaked through, and air raid sirens rang more frequently than church bells. By spring, German and Italian squadrons based in Sicily and Tunisia were launching up to 16 air raids a day. Records show that in March, alone over 2,240 tons of bombs fell on Valletta and its outlying villages. Hospitals moved underground, schools relocated to ancient caves, and a generation of Maltese children learned to read by candlelight in bomb shelters. British commanders rotated exhausted RAF squadrons onto the island, but by April 1942, these reinforcements struggled to keep their machines flying. Hurricanes and Spitfires, the backbone of Malta's air defense, arrived battered and in pieces. Local mechanics, many trained in peacetime to repair fishing boats or motorcars, now worked miracles, recycling wreckage, patching wings with linen and glue, coaxing old Merlin engines back to life. Every sortie was a gamble. The defenders rarely had more than a dozen serviceable fighters at dawn. Through this adversity, a culture of innovation blossomed. Malta's radar operators, some recruited straight from university, helped orchestrate perfectly timed interceptions, tracking enemy aircraft as they crossed the narrow straits from Sicily. Civilians played their part, relaying sightings and organizing first aid posts across devastated neighborhoods. The legendary Courageous Women of Mosta rescued air raid victims from collapsing houses, forming human chains amid burning debris. In this crucible, unlikely heroes emerged. Squadron leader Stan Turner, famed for his fearless low-level attacks, became a household name. George Björling, the Canadian ace, was joined by pilots from Poland, Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, and even the United States, volunteers drawn by Malta's desperate need and legendary struggle. Their stories circulated in letters home, igniting admiration and hope among allied nations watching anxiously from afar. The daily rhythm of siege life bred iron discipline and haunting camaraderie. Cookhouses provided the same meal, bully beef, hardtack biscuits and tea day after day, but morale remained. The Maltese people, awarded the George Cross for collective valor, kept faith with their defenders. Each dawn brought a new test. With every all clear, the battered island would emerge, count its losses, and steel itself for another onslaught from the sky. April 1942 etched Malta's defiance into legend, but every hour of survival came with a story of sacrifice. As new Spitfires landed, hastily assembled from crates off Gibraltar-bound convoys, their pilots knew local engineers would toil through the night, often under bombardment, just to patch the bullet holes and coax battered engines back to life. There was no luxury of delay. Sometimes a plane downed before lunch was already flying before sunset. The clockwork of Malta's resilience ran on sweat, resourcefulness, and determination that even seasoned airmen found astonishing. At the heart of the island's endurance were the communities battered by constant raids. In Mostar, a German bomb pierced the dome of the cathedral during Mass, yet miraculously failed to explode. The news flashed through Malta like a miracle. It became a tale of divine protection. Underground, nuns distributed bread and comforted orphans, while parish priests recorded births, deaths, and marriages in candlelit crypts, refusing to let war erase tradition. Life and death intertwined under the same vaulted stones, forging a unity between civilians and soldiers few places in the world could match. The British government, aware of Malta's strategic value, committed to unimaginable risks. Supply convoys, braved Axis submarines and the Luftwaffe, suffering catastrophic losses. The most desperate, codenamed Operation Pedestal and Harpoon, saw merchant ships limping into Valletta's Grand Harbour ablaze and half-sunk, guided by spotter boats and cheered by crowds on bomb-shattered docks. When the Ohio, a crippled American tanker, managed to deliver her oil, her hull caving, decks burning, it was said Malta itself had been refueled. These daring resupply missions became global headlines, cementing Malta's place at the heart of Allied hopes. Axis planners underestimated not just the skill, but the improvisational genius of Malta's defenders. Mechanics hid vital parts and supplies back-to-back with civilians. Giraffe ground crews filled sandbags with torn parachutes, limited by shortage but creative with resources. Maltese fishermen risked minefields at night to rescue downed pilots or gather intelligence on Axis activity. Housewives gathered water from communal wells as incendiary bombs fell, and still found spirits enough to greet returning pilots with loaves of black bread or hand-stitched talismans against ill luck. Amid devastation, daily life pressed forward. Cooks found ingenious ways to stretch rations: lentil soup flecked with bay leaves, rabbit stewed for feast days, eggs bartered like gold. Children skipped rope, mapped bomb craters, and swapped. Tales of ghost squadrons defending the island when the sirens sounded deep in the night. The George Cross, awarded collectively by King George VI, was displayed on public buildings as both a warning and a promise. Malta would not be made to yield. By late April, as the casualty lists lengthened and fuel supplies reached their lowest, still the defenders prepared for each engagement with grim resolve. Spitfires scrambled with barely a gallon of fuel reserve, sometimes forced to glide home on empty tanks or to ditch in the sea, trusting in coastal boats to find them. Medics patched up wounds in stone-walled clinics, using linen torn from wedding. Dresses and chloroform traded for cigarettes whenever possible, through dangerous convoy barter. International news bulletins relayed Malta's ordeal to a world desperate for Allied good news. In London, radio listeners cheered at every confirmed enemy aircraft downed. Across Australia, Canada, and the Commonwealth, volunteers signed up for the Malta Run, knowing the risks but unwilling to see history's most bombed island stand alone. By the end of that fateful month, Malta's defenders had rewritten the language of resistance. What began as survival became something greater, a symbol of unbreakable spirit, a slap in the face of Axis certainty, and proof that, even under the darkest skies, courage could tip the scales of war. April's siege tightened relentlessly, as the Luftwaffe and Regia Aeronautica adopted new brutal strategies to force Malta's surrender. Axis command centers in Sicily coordinated back-to-back waves, launching over 60 air raids in some 24-hour periods, more than London endured during the Blitz. The aim was simple, yet chilling: grind the island to dust, shatter civilian resolve, and silence its runways. Day and night, air raid sirens shrieked warnings, driving the population of Valletta underground, while German Hinkel and Junkers bombers blotted out the midday sun. Within the warren of tunnels beneath La Valletta, REF controllers strained over crackling radios, pinpointing incoming formations by radar and observer reports. Squadrons scrambled with seconds to spare, pilots flinging themselves into cockpits, engines roaring as ground crews loaded cannons and fueled tanks still warm from the last flight. There was rarely time to wipe the oil from the wings. Each tangle with the enemy was a gamble with survival. Malta's tiny pool of fighters often pitted 6 or 7 planes against upwards of 40 bombers and escorting fighters. The defenders faced mounting shortages. Machine gun belts dwindled to a handful of bursts, spare parts scavenged from smoking wrecks, and many young pilots learning combat tactics on their first actual sorties. Squadron leader Stan Turner inspired his men by example, leading head-on attacks that defied doctrine, flying so low beneath bomber formations that gunners lost track of him. More than once, Turner's own Spitfire limped home shot to pieces, its frame patched overnight to ensure he'd lead the next day's fight. German strategy shifted as losses mounted. Dive bombers targeted not only airfields, but power stations, harbours, and even the aqueducts that supplied Malta's scant fresh water. Sliema and Floriana, once bustling neighbourhoods, became mazes of collapsed stone. Yet even amid such devastation, resistance intensified. Local volunteers took up shovels between raids, clearing runways and helping the wounded reach makeshift hospitals carved into cliffsides. A new wave of terror followed, incendiary raids designed to burn the remaining fuel bunkers and ammunition stores. Great plumes of oily smoke rose over Marsa, staining the sky black. During one harrowing stretch, the Luftwaffe dropped leaflets promising mercy to any Maltese who demanded surrender. Instead, these served as grim reminders of what was at stake, fueling only greater defiance as children gathered them for fire kindling, and mothers mocked their contents in the shelters. Against these odds, the defenders pulled off remarkable feats. Gunners orchestrated box barrages, firing in synchrony so thickly that even seasoned Luftwaffe crews called the Valletta approaches the corridor of death. Each success bred hope, each loss a fresh resolve not to let the island fall. Intelligence reports in Allied hands revealed Axis frustration. Pilots spoke of Malta as the cursed rock, a place where luck ran thin and survival felt borrowed. As weeks passed, the toll deepened. The Royal Engineers rebuilt runways by lantern light, laying tarmac over smouldering craters and setting dynamite to obliterate the wreckage before dawn attacks. The population learned the drill by heart. When the klaxon wailed, there was no hesitation, just a silent march to safety. Priests comforted the terrified and buried the fallen, inscribing names on boards when stone for headstones ran out. Yet the turning point approached as RAF intelligence decrypted Axis attack schedules. Planners devised a rotation to maximize precious Spitfire sorties, and mechanics achieved miracles, stripping, refitting, and relaunching planes in hours rather than days. Under darkness, British submarines braved minefields and enemy patrols to offload crates of ammunition and medicine, unexpected lifelines that allowed Malta's defences to hold. By April's third week, the story of Malta's resistance became a global symbol of hope, with newsreels capturing children waving improvised Maltese crosses amid ruins. Allied headquarters in London and Washington pointed to Malta as proof that the Axis could be stopped. And in every clash above, the battle's stakes echoed. If Malta fell, so too might the Allied line across the entire Mediterranean. April's final days brought Malta to the edge of collapse. German and Italian bombers returned with dogged fury, determined to erase the island from Allied control once and for all. More than 6,000 tons of explosives rained down by the month's close, turning Valletta into a wasteland of dust and shattered limestone. Yet amid this devastation, something extraordinary unfolded. The defenders, exhausted, starving, and outnumbered, refused to yield an inch. Every sortie, every shell, every heartbeat was an act of defiance that would echo through history. At Tarkali airfield, now little more than a cratered plain, ground crews worked barefoot among smoking wrecks. Engineers rebuilt planes beneath canvas sheets, timing repairs between incoming raids. Each takeoff felt like a miracle. One Spitfire, its wings patched with fabric and paint still wet, lifted skyward into a cloud of smoke, gunning straight into a column of incoming bombers. The pilot, barely 20, shot down 2 in one pass before crash landing on the rubble-strewn runway. That image, captured later by war photographers, came to symbolize the madness and majesty of Malta's defense. Civilians faced horrors of their own. Valletta's once bustling markets lay buried. Hospitals overflowed, operating by kerosene light. Mothers carried their children deeper underground when anti-personnel bombs fell, wrapping them in blankets torn from their wedding linens. Yet amid despair, small miracles persisted. A boy pulled alive from a collapsed bakery after 3 days. A chapel bell, cracked but unbroken, still ringing to signal hope. The people of Malta were no longer merely bystanders. They had become soldiers without uniforms, an unarmed army that fought through endurance alone. The Luftwaffe's onslaught reached absurd proportions. Some pilots flew 3 missions a day, bomb loads reduced to conserve dwindling supplies, and crew morale collapsing under unending losses. Reports intercepted by British intelligence told of German commanders describing Malta as the black hole of the Mediterranean. Many aircraft never returned from their sorties, and those that did came back riddled with flak and bullet scars, their crews shaken by what they called walls of fire. What had been conceived as an easy extermination had become a meat grinder that consumed both sides. April 20th marked the darkest hour. Axis Command launched its largest mass raid. Over 100 bombers escorted by 50 fighters. The defenders scrambled with just 9 serviceable Spitfires. Still, Malta's gunners and pilots fought savagely. Over Grand Harbour, tracer fire stitched across the clouds like lightning, illuminating the silhouettes of falling aircraft. Within an hour, 15 enemy bombers were down, including one that exploded mid-air, scattering debris across the coastline. It seemed impossible, yet by the battle's end the defenders had survived again. But survival came at a steep cost. Fuel supplies dropped below critical levels. Only hours of combat endurance remained. Anti-aircraft crews began rationing shells, saving fire for when bombers approached under 5,000 feet. Commanders debated evacuation or surrender, but both options meant abandoning the Mediterranean. Churchill's original order, hold Malta at all costs, became a mantra. Even if the island burned to dust, it would do so defiantly. Meanwhile, across Sicily, Axis airfields fell strangely quiet. Fighter groups that once terrorized the island had lost pilots faster than replacements could arrive. Kesselring, furious at the attrition, demanded renewed assault plans. Yet logistical collapse loomed. The Luftwaffe's fuel convoys were being sunk by British submarines, emboldened by Malta's air support. The noose they had meant for the island now tightened around their own necks. By month's end, the defenders tallied an incredible claim: 300 enemy aircraft destroyed or crippled in Malta's skies. The figure staggered Allied commanders. It wasn't just a number. It represented delayed invasions, lifelines restored, and morale revived across an entire warfront. The island that was meant to fall had become an Axis nightmare, the hardest target the Luftwaffe had ever faced. Out of the rubble, Malta's survivors emerged battered but proud. Their faith, courage, and unity stood against an empire's aerial fury. In those burning skies, history witnessed something timeless, the moment when endurance became victory, when a small island's flame refused to be extinguished by a storm of steel. The main event of Malta's defiance unfolded not in a single battle, but as a crescendo of relentless action and shockingly innovative tactics. The heart of April 1942 witnessed both sides locked in a dance of violence, with Malta's fate hanging by the thinnest thread. By now, every defender was running on instinct. Mechanics worked while bombs fell. Gunners slept beside their stations. Pilots took off so quickly some forgot to strap their goggles or helmets. Yet even amid chaos, discipline and purpose shaped the small island's overwhelming impact on the Axis war machine. On the morning of April 22nd, with surviving Spitfires barely patched together and running on scavenged fuel, Wing Commander Hugh Puy-Lloyd ordered the riskiest counter-strategy yet. "No defensive patrols," he told his pilots. "We hit them before they cross the coast." The odds were brutal. 9 fighters against a wave of nearly 60 enemy bombers and escorts. Still, the RAF went up, attacking head-on, weaving through black bursts of flak and ricocheting gunfire. First Lieutenant Björling, whose Screwball Express was now infamous, launched into a vertical climb, tearing straight through the bomber formation. He scored 3 kills before most German gunners even saw him coming. On land, the anti-aircraft batteries implemented a forbidden plan few in London had ever approved. Instead of targeting bombers at altitude, they waited until the formation committed to its dive, when evasive action was hardest and payloads couldn't be jettisoned without mission loss. Dozens of heavy guns, camouflaged among church rooftops and abandoned houses, opened fire in synchronized box barrages. The sky over Valletta, became a solid wall of bursting metal. German aircrews later recorded the event as flying through a furnace. The tactic was brutally effective. 17 bombers came down in a single engagement, their wreckage littering Maltese fields and the churning blue waters of the surrounding sea. No corner of Malta remained untouched. At Lucca Airfield, service crews invented ways to rebuild even the most hopeless aircraft. Wings were patched with tablecloth linen, painted with camouflage. Propellers were hammered straight, then wrapped in strips of copper wire. Old car engines, stripped from taxis by volunteer mechanics, powered field radios and portable searchlights. Despite fatigue, the tempo of sorties increased. Spitfire pilots flew up to 6 missions in a single day, refueling at speed, while ground staff jammed ammunition into red-hot gun barrels. The courage wasn't limited to those in uniform. In the battered towns, Maltese civilians launched their own offensive. A network of rooftop spotters, mostly women and teenagers, relayed enemy positions using hand-cranked radios and coded lamp flashes. Their coordination allowed anti-aircraft crews to focus their fire at the precise approaches used by German flights, turning every attack into a deadly gamble for the raiders. Meanwhile, the Royal Navy played a crucial supporting role. Swordfish biplanes, relics from the First World War, took off from makeshift decks to lay minefields in Axis shipping lanes at night. British submarines delivered spare parts, medical supplies, and even fresh mail, braving depth charges to slip past enemy screens. Each successful run was celebrated in hush-toned gatherings beneath bomb-shattered shelters, where news of every rescued pilot, every destroyed bomber, inspired another day of resistance. The pressure on the Axis was immense. Gunners from the German 2nd Flieger Division, veterans of campaigns in Poland and France, confessed in captured diaries that Malta is haunted, no rest, no safe return. As the kill count soared past 250 enemy aircraft, Axis command rushed in their elite night squadrons. They initiated midnight raids, hoping fatigue would break the defenders. Instead, the defenders adapted, using headlights from abandoned trucks to illuminate runways, firing moonlit flares, and intercepting bombers with barely seconds warning. Malta's legendary resilience culminated at Thursday's dawn. April 30th, 200 bombers were sighted, aiming to finish what weeks of suffering had not achieved. All available fighters scrambled, British, Canadian, Australian, and Maltese. The ensuing sky battle raged for hours. By noon, 34 more Axis aircraft were lost. The impossible mission had succeeded. Malta didn't just survive. It struck a blow so staggering, the story would travel from whispered bunkers to the halls of power in London and Berlin. But Malta's triumph was measured not only by numbers, but by the ingenuity and courage that rippled through every hour of the siege. As April closed, the main event escalated with fresh urgency. Axis pilots, seasoned and scarred, prepared for what they believed would be the final bombardment. Instead, they found a fortress transformed, where every innovation came from necessity and every act of resistance carried historic weight. In the makeshift HQ beneath Valletta's streets, British engineers reported a miracle. Every Spitfire sent from Gibraltar or Egypt, many thought unfit to fly, had taken to the air in some capacity. A handful of grounded aircraft were restored using mismatched salvage, hand-forged engine parts, and desperate improvisation. Mechanics coaxed performance from tired Merlin engines, with petrol siphoned from trucks and field stoves. Even aircraft written off earlier in the month were somehow refitted for combat. Flying again in new hands, RAF and Allied pilots on Malta displayed tactics so daring that Axis bombers began rotating their formations, hoping to confuse defenders. George Burling's night intercepts became legendary. His Spitfire flew into bomber streams with lights off, navigating by star patterns and radio bearings given by ground spotters. He and fellow aces scored multiple kills in darkness, an impossible mission, if not for the skill and coordination developed under unrelenting fire. Those tactics were informed by Malta's radar network, nicknamed the Island's Ears. Set up across cliffs and ancient towers, these installations allowed defenders to anticipate raids before they reached the horizon. By relaying data instantly to scrambled squadrons, controllers compressed response times from minutes to seconds. When the Luftwaffe changed direction, Malta's fighters and anti-aircraft guns pivoted in flawless harmony. hammering incoming waves precisely where they faltered in formation. The weeks of the main event also saw civilian innovation reach its peak. With water pipes cracked by bombs and food dwindling, communal kitchens sprung up in school basements and crypts. Housewives devised recipes from tinned meat and wild greens, feeding hundreds under the bombs. Volunteers formed fire brigades, using sand from collapsed walls and buckets scavenged from shipwrecks. Their efforts put out dozens of fires that otherwise would have spread into fuel reserves or medical stores. Royal Navy submariners, upon learning of Malta's successes, acted in parallel. Their daring supply drops, codenamed Impossible Runs, delivered replacement gun barrels, medicine, and encrypted instructions for timing joint sea and air attacks. Each delivery set up new traps for Axis bombers, floating mines disguised as oil drums, radio triggers hidden among cargo for explosive anti-aircraft mortars. The psychological effect on the Axis was severe. By month's end, German pilots circulated ominous warnings. 1 in 4 will not return from Malta's skies. Luftwaffe morale plummeted. Intercepted radio messages revealed commanders pleading for reassignment or refusing to fly. Malta's defenders, meanwhile, drew strength from every victory. Daily kill reports aired on underground radios, each confirmation stirring pride and resolve among soldiers and civilians alike. When a formation of bombers was brought down over Marsak's Lock Bay, the debris was salvaged within hours by volunteers who collected everything. But more importantly, stories of bravery moved from whispered legend to shared identity. By April's final sunset, the numbers seemed unbelievable. Over 300 Axis aircraft destroyed or crippled, with countless more damaged. Malta's tiny force, isolated and at the very brink, had not just survived but shifted the momentum of the Mediterranean theater. The world took notice. Newsreel crews arrived, reporters braved bombing runs to chronicle tales from civilians, gunners, and pilots. Victories in the main event set up the days to come. Malta was no longer merely resisting. It was redefining Allied fortunes in the Middle Sea. For every defender, on land or in the air, the battle's main event was proof that courage and ingenuity could turn even the smallest hope into historic triumph. April's onslaught ended, and Malta's battered defenders surveyed the scorched ground under skies that were finally, briefly, quiet. The outcome defied every military and mathematical expectation. The island that was supposed to be overrun had instead turned its siege into a stunning reversal for the Axis. By the close of 1942's most violent month, official records listed over 300 bombers shot down or crippled, a statistic that stoked celebrations in Allied command and disbelief in Axis headquarters. Yet the real measure of victory was found everywhere across Malta, from wreck-strewn runways to ruined neighborhoods, in scars both physical and psychological. Grand Harbor's waters, once the Axis' main target, filled with debris and battered enemy aircraft. Survivors gathered to survey the damage and rebuild. They counted crushed fuel tanks, collapsed stone warehouses, and the remains of merchant ships that had somehow limped into port under constant fire. Still, every piece salvaged contributed to Malta's ongoing defiance. Mechanics reclaimed engines from wrecked bombers for use in generators, while gunners inventoried recovered ammunition dropped from enemy supply planes that missed their marks. Axis losses became legend across the Mediterranean. German and Italian air units, once dominant over land and sea, faced the highest attrition rates recorded in the theater up to that point. Intelligence intercepted in London confirmed the collapse of morale. Pilots refused new sorties, and squadron commanders requested immediate transfers out of range of Malta's defenders. A single month's losses had gutted Kesselring's campaign, forcing the Reich to divert precious aircraft from Russia and France in a bid to regain the initiative, a redeployment that would cost the Axis dearly elsewhere. But Malta's people paid a terrible price for victory. Entire blocks of Valletta and Sliema lay flattened, schools, churches, and shops gutted by flame. Food rationing grew stricter. Wheat shipments delayed meant many families lived for days on bread and boiled cabbage. The George Cross, a medal awarded collectively to the island, became both symbol of pride and a haunting reminder of how much suffering shaped survival. Yet the population rallied daily for burial details, repairs, field hospitals, and makeshift kitchens, pushing on even as resources dwindled. and news of distant battles filtered in via crackling shortwave radios. The island's military command prepared to capitalize on the victory. At WWII, air crews worked without pause, rearming surviving Spitfires and Hurricanes. Messages from Churchill praised the defenders as the linchpin of our empire's defense and ordered reinforcements to prepare for counterstrikes. Malta's battered navy, supported by fresh supplies and intelligence, went on the offensive. British submarines attacked Axis convoys, emboldened by the new air cover and the sudden collapse of enemy control in the center sea lanes. International news carried Malta's name to all corners of the Allied world. Photographs showed determined faces, bombed-out buildings, and the Maltese cross fluttering above gutted ramparts. Courage became contagious. The British Commonwealth, inspired by Malta's resistance, sent new volunteers for the Malta Run, carrying both critical supplies and hope. Elsewhere, resistance movements cited Malta's stand as proof that small, determined forces could stonewall even the largest empires. Behind these immediate outcomes, strategists in London and Washington revised their plans for the Mediterranean. Malta's defense had forced Rommel's Africa Corps into supply collapse. It shifted the tempo of operations in Egypt and Tunisia. The victory ensured Allied supply convoys could reach Alexandria without constant interception. Malta, once the most bombed target in the world, became an offensive base from which the Allies would launch their next tide, Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa. As May began and battered survivors stepped into sunlight, the sense of victory remained tempered by loss. Still, Malta stood tall. The outcome clarified. A month of ceaseless siege had not only saved the island, but altered the trajectory of World War II in the Mediterranean. For every scar on Malta's land, history would remember the lives saved, the invasion delayed, and the spirit that refused to surrender. The aftermath of Malta's astonishing resistance rippled through the Mediterranean and far beyond. The strategic consequences were immediate, with Axis air power crippled, Allied supply lines reopened, and Rommel's campaign in North Africa lost its lifeline. Malta's airfields, once battered almost out of existence, rapidly became launch pads for offensive operations. RAF squadrons hunted German convoys, and the Royal Navy deployed strikes from Malta's harbours with renewed confidence. Enemy transports dwindled as submarine and air attacks intensified, forcing the Axis to reroute entire fleets, delay ground advances, and cede initiative. For Malta's people, victory meant starting over. Streets in Valletta filled with rubble were slowly cleared by labour crews. Many formed from local volunteers, soldiers on leave, and even children eager to resume ruined routines. Schools reopened in communal shelters, shops rebuilt using salvaged wood and stone. The rhythm of daily prayer, commerce, and meals gradually returned. Survivors rediscovered friends and family lost in the chaos. Tales of miraculous escapes and heroic deeds circulated over shared food in candlelit kitchens. International attention transformed the island's suffering into shared inspiration. The George Cross was formally integrated into Malta's national flag, and ceremonies marked heroic contributions from every corner of society. Gunners, pilots, engineers, schoolteachers, priests, and fishermen. Photographs of defiant Maltese faces, patched uniforms, and bomb-shattered buildings spread from London to Washington, igniting enthusiasm and gratitude across the Allied world. Malta became a touchstone, a reminder that defiance alone could alter the global tide. The emotional recovery was slower. Many civilians struggled with trauma, sleep haunted by sirens and concussion blasts, nervous glances skyward at the sound of engines. The marks of siege remained on every wall, every face, every story. Yet courage became routine. When air raid warnings blared again during scattered follow-up attacks, there was no panic. Calm discipline prevailed, lessons learned in April's crucible. New arrivals, soldiers and volunteers from the Commonwealth, were swiftly absorbed into a fighting culture forged under the heaviest bombardment in history. Military planners across the Allies now saw Malta not just as a fortress, but as a weapon. Within weeks, bombers and reconnaissance squadrons left Malta to strike airfields in Sicily and southern Italy, degrading Axis air power and softening targets for the planned invasions of North Africa and ultimately mainland Europe. Malta's reputation for resilience spread to other embattled strongholds. Stalingrad, Tobruk, Leningrad, proving that even under unending attack, dominance could be won in small steps by ordinary people responding with extraordinary valor. The island's victory inspired innovation. Local workshops experimented with aircraft repairs using captured enemy parts. Medical staff improvised new techniques, from field surgery trials. Civilian spotter networks improved warning times for raids by recording patterns in Axis approach routes. What had begun as improvisation under duress became institutional knowledge, exported to other Allied operations across the globe. While Malta's skies cleared, the war elsewhere ground on. Yet every Allied newsreel repeated the island's story. 300 enemy bombers destroyed or crippled in a single month. Malta's defenders, fighters, gunners, engineers, and civilians, were hailed as heroes whose sacrifice had altered the war's trajectory. Churchill declared the siege broken, and Roosevelt sent personal messages of thanks to Maltese leaders. In Axis capitals, Malta's name became synonymous with disaster. Lessons drawn from the failed siege reverberated in planning for the rest of the conflict. The true outcome, for Malta and the world, would be measured not simply in statistics or medals, but in the restoration of hope. A battered community rebuilt in defiance, an empire forced into retreat, and a template of resistance that would shape victory in the darkest years ahead. Malta's ordeal in April 1942 ended not with a celebration, but with a measured silence, a collective breath taken by survivors, defenders, and commanders who had witnessed the impossible. As dawn broke on the first days of May, the skyline shimmered with dust and sunlight, and the battered Maltese cross fluttered above ruins that were now trophies of endurance. Old men swept shattered tiles from church courtyards. Children emerged blinking into the daylight, uncertain the thunder overhead had truly ceased. In the stillness, the spirit of the island surfaced in soft voices, shared meals and stories retold in candlelit kitchens. The victory was not only measured by shot-down bombers or preserved runways. It pulsed in the steely resolve of pilots who returned from missions with bullet-riddled wings, in the exhausted pride of nurses who worked through the night on stretchers laid over limestone floors, in the quiet resilience of families who patched walls with borrowed bricks and salvaged wood, determined to keep daily life alive amid chaos. Priests prayed for peace, mothers busied themselves with rationed flour and hope, and tradesmen planned the reopening of shops, shattered by high explosives. For the Allied commanders watching from London and Alexandria, Malta's survival was a beacon, a signal that the Axis could be stopped by courage and ingenuity. The news traveled fast. Malta had defied both gravity and fate, anchoring the Allied defense of the Mediterranean and giving Rommel his first true supply crisis. Churchill's praise echoed over the island, but for local Maltese, the real achievement was found in reunions, repairs, and rare laughter heard after months of bombardment. Yet beneath every triumph lay scars. The funerals continued, and every name etched onto makeshift memorials re-emphasized the price of endurance. Medical staff documented wounds and illnesses caused not just by bombs but by malnutrition, exhaustion, and the weight of constant fear. School teachers devised lessons that balanced grammar with stories of the siege, a living curriculum for a generation that saw its world turned upside down. Still, the closing of April's chapter brought a transformation. Malta was no longer merely under siege. It had become the story itself, a symbol to the world that the smallest, most isolated garrison could shift the balance of a global war. Gunners cleaned their barrels. Engineers inventoried spare parts. The Navy planned new operations. The RAF mapped fresh counterattacks. Malta was both a fortress and a springboard, moving from defense to offense in the blink of an eye. International delegations arrived, bearing medals and promises. Journalists chronicled the resilience with film and pen, helping Malta's legend grow. In the Allied nations, young volunteers queued to join the Malta Run, inspired by tales drifting across continents via telegram and radio. Resistance groups from occupied France and Yugoslavia cited Malta's siege as inspiration for their own campaigns, turning Malta must not fall into a rallying cry for survival against impossible odds. As reconstruction began, every stone laid was both a tribute and a promise. Malta's battered infrastructure became grounds for innovation. Modest homes rebuilt into community centers, churches restored with glass melted from bomb fragments. The narrative closed not in despair, but in determination. Malta's people would carry forward the lessons of unity, strength through hardship, and the belief that, when nations needed hope most, a single island could rewrite the outcome of a world at war. In the months that followed, Malta's resilience would become an enduring symbol across battlefields and broken cities, embodying the spirit of a people who had faced annihilation and refused to bend. The siege was over, but the legacy remained alive in letters from returning veterans, in whispered prayers beneath flickering lights, and in the steady rebuilding of a society torn apart by war's relentless hand. Within Allied leadership circles, Malta's defense prompted strategic reassessments that shaped campaigns far beyond the Mediterranean. The island's ability to hold the line forced Axis commanders to divert resources, affecting operations from North Africa to the Eastern Front. Its success blunted the momentum of enemy advances, buying precious time for the Allies to regroup and strike back. Locally, Malta's communities thrived on unity forged in adversity. Once shattered neighborhoods blossomed anew. Schools reopened, industries restarted, and markets buzzed with cautious optimism. Wartime innovations adapted to peacetime needs. Electrical grids rebuilt with salvaged materials, improved lighting. Water purification initiatives expanded, drawing on lessons learned from sieges and shortages. The George Cross, awarded to the entire island, became a proud emblem stitched onto uniforms, painted onto walls and engraved in hearts. It symbolized not just valor in battle, but the grit of ordinary people who survived nights of terror to greet the dawn. Annual commemorations honored those lost and celebrated survival, a solemn reminder that freedom came through sacrifice. Malta's story traveled beyond its shores, inspiring resistance movements in occupied Europe and communities under siege worldwide. The notion that courage could derail the most massive assault forged a common bond among Allied nations and guerrilla fighters alike. The island's narrative became a beacon of hope, proof that even the smallest voice matters in the cacophony of war. For historians, Malta's April 1942 defense stands as a case study in endurance, innovation, and collaboration. It blends moments of quiet desperation with flashes of extraordinary heroism. Pilots flying beyond their limits, mechanics defying shortages, civilians embracing hardship with unwavering resolve. The island that shot down 300 bombers in a month etched itself into the chronicles of World War II, a testament to what determination can achieve against the greatest odds. As peace finally approached, Malta transitioned from symbol to sanctuary. Its airfields would later host the build-up for the Allied push into Italy, a launching pad for liberation. The rubble-stone streets became paths walked by new generations, informed by stories of sacrifice and triumph. Survivors passed down memories, shaping a heritage intertwined with courage and survival. Malta did not merely survive April 1942, it became immortal. Its skies, once fire-streaked battlegrounds, now held the quiet promise of peace, shining above an island forever marked by the fierce will to endure and overcome.